So welcome everyone to New South Wales DPI Dairies webinar number 12, Managing Heat Stress on Pasture-Based AMS Farms. My name is Nicholas Lyons. I am a Development Officer Dairy with the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries, and I have a national role supporting technology adoption on Australian dairy farms. My role focuses on robotic milking. It's not exclusive of robotic milking, but focuses on robotic milking. However, this webinar today is not about me. Today we have the great privilege of having a young and vibrant guest speaker with us. Ms Ashleigh Wildridge completed her undergraduate degree in animal science with Charlestown University at Wagga Wagga. Maybe more relevant to today's webinar is the research that Ashleigh did as part of her PhD at the Dairy Science Group of the University of Sydney in Camden, New South Wales. During her PhD, she explored automatic milking systems, or AMS, and the ways in which farmers, cows, and certain infrastructure interact within the system. Her work had a strong focus on cow behavior and welfare, providing, for example, the first research on heat stress in pasture-based AMS. Following on from this, she has also explored the changes to the human-animal relationship on 5 conventional dairy farms transitioning to AMS. Ashleigh is passionate about working with farmers and industry and is currently a project officer with Meat and Livestock Australia. On the personal side, Ashleigh's other passions include horse riding, four-wheel driving, and camping, traveling in the amazing Australian bush. I really appreciate, Ash, your time and willingness to share with us your insights into managing heat stress on pasture-based AMS farm. I invited Ashleigh earlier late last year to run a webinar on the results of one of her research projects as part of her PhD, and she kindly accepted. So thanks, Ash, for this. The presentation will go for around half an hour, 40 minutes, and it will be mostly focused on the effects of temperature and humidity on milking frequency and daily yield on pasture-based AMS, as well as strategies to try and mitigate it using shade on the laneway and using shade at the milking facility. So let's leave it to the expert. Ash, the floor is yours. I will trust you'll make honor to the topic and the presentation. So I'll share presenter right with you now. All yours, Ash.
Oh, sorry, there we go. My microphone was muted. Thank you for the introduction, Nico. And thank you also for inviting me to come and speak. And as you said, I've not long submitted my PhD, which I mostly looked at managing heat stress in pasture-based automatic milking systems. And for my talk today, I just wanted to go over a very brief background just to cover some of the basics of what we already know about heat stress, just before I then go into 4 of my research projects that I conducted over the last couple of years, where I looked at, for the first project, where I looked at how summer weather conditions impact on the performance of cows in pasture-based automatic milking systems, which had not previously been done before. And then I had 3 separate projects where I looked at ways in which hot weather can be managed on farm, where the first project looked at fetching cows at night to help improve milking frequency. The second project, I looked at the use of shade along laneways to also help improve milking frequency through voluntary traffic. And for the last project, I looked at the use of shade at the dairy, at the milking facility, as a way to also help. Oh, there we go. So we already know that heat stress impacts the cows in a number of ways, where some of the biggest initial impacts that affect cow performance are on feed intake, milk yield and fertility, as we all see those decline in hot weather. But then going on further from those main impacts, especially when considering changes that might come into play in a voluntary traffic situation, we've also found, previous research has also found that the activity of cows is reduced during hot weather, particularly during the day. And they also tend to spend more of their time during the day close to shade and water. And so these play a big part in some of the research that I performed. But because before I started my PhD, no research had been done on heat stress in pasture-based automatic milking systems, I went back to the start to see just how cows were being affected by hot weather in these systems. So the first project that I looked at, I gathered up to 3 summer periods worth of milking data to find out how the cows were performing. And I gathered this from 6 pasture-based automatic milking systems in Australia. And using the milking data that I calculated the average milk yield per cow per day and the average milking frequency per cow per day for each of those farms. I then obtained weather information from the BOM website, and I linked this information with the milking data. And from the weather information that I got, I calculated a temperature humidity index, which combines the temperature and the humidity of the area to create a type of heat stress index, if you like, that is commonly used in research. And based on this index, what research has found is that a THI of 68, which is approximately 22 degrees at 50% humidity, is the level at which the onset of signs of heat stress in cows begins. So that's really not very high. So you can see quite clearly that cows are quite sensitive to heat and can be quite susceptible to heat stress. So what I found from looking at the milking data and the weather data from those 6 pasture-based farms was that the milk yield of the cows decreased in response to an increasing temperature humidity index from up to 3 days prior to the milking event. So you can see that the effects of the hot weather can last well beyond the actual day of when the hot weather occurred. And I also found that increases in milking frequency occurred when the maximum temperature humidity index increased or was higher on 1 and 2 days prior to a milking event. So that sort of shows a bit of a lag effect of the hot weather on the frequency that cows were presenting for milking. So from that project, we found that hot weather was having a negative effect on the performance of cows. And after that, I then started looking into ways in which we can reduce these effects through management decisions that we can make on farm. So the first project that I looked at was by altering the fetching times of the cows. So I did this as a pilot study in early spring, just to see how the cows would respond. I used a commercial farm that was milking approximately 250 cows at the time, and those cows were managed using three-way grazing. And with the way that three-way grazing works, one of the pasture allocations is often fetched in the morning after a much longer milking interval than the other two pasture allocations. So I selected this allocation, which on that farm happened to be open from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And instead of fetching those cows in the morning, as the farmer would do normally, I fetched these cows in the middle of the night to see how long, which I believe would have a particularly strong application during hot weather. So cows are being encouraged to milk at night, and by fetching the cows at night, there's reduced stress on them from body heat production from locomotion, which would make the cows very uncomfortable from fetching them during the heat of the day. So I understand that fetching cows in the middle of the night is not something that a lot of farmers are going to want to do. So this project was aimed at being applied in the future with future technologies, such as the robot you can see in the background of this picture, or you may have even heard in recent news stories, which has been used to fetch or call cows to move them from one paddock to the other. So that's one of the aims of this project, is to be applied in that setting. And what I found from fetching the cows at night is that they responded extremely well. I thought that perhaps that they would much rather be sleeping and not want to go anywhere. But what I found was, after I encouraged them out of the paddock, they travelled up the laneway and into the milking facility without needing extra encouragement. So I didn't actually follow them up the laneway. I just left them on the laneway to walk to the dairy by themselves. And they did that. So it's quite promising, and will make it easier for technologies in the future, depending on what type of technology that is, to fetch the cows. Or even if a farmer wants to fetch cows at night, they can just take the cows out of the paddock and then go back home without having to push every cow into the dairy. And I also found that cows that were early in their first lactation, that were fairly shy and not yet trafficking well in the system, had received the most benefit from this process, as it actually encouraged them to go to the dairy at night when there were fewer cows there. And therefore less competition to get into the milking road, giving them a bit more confidence in this process. And when I actually spoke to this commercial farmer a couple of months after I'd been there, he said that those cows that weren't trafficking well before I started just progressed quite impressively after I'd been, and they had trafficked a lot better than early lactation cows that he's had previously that weren't being fetched at night. So he was really impressed with that, and said that he was actually repeating this process after each calving season to help these cows go. So other than that, I also found that by fetching cows at night, they had a significantly reduced milking interval. So in a summer situation where cows were not milking so frequently, by fetching them at night, and especially with your long interval milking intervals that go beyond 16 hours, that can have quite a lot of negative effects on udder health. This would also be a really good process to use in situations like that, if that were a problem. So that method of fetching cows at night was quite successful for improving milkings at night, which I believe, when done in summer, will show similar effects and be quite positive for cow wellbeing. But as automatic milking systems do operate 24 hours a day, we still need cows to milk during the day in order to achieve more than one milking per day. So I also wanted to look at ways of improving milking during the day without causing significant increases to labour. That's the reason that a lot of farmers go into automatic milking systems, is that they need the labour savings. So back at the start of the presentation, I mentioned how heat stress reduces cow activity and increases shade and water use. And I thought that I might be able to combine these so that the cows and the farmers can benefit by utilising what the cows want, such as shade, and then also getting what the farmer needs, which is the voluntary traffic. And then I wanted all of this without putting extra stress on the cows. So one of my first idea for this, I got 4 groups of cows with 6 cows in each group, where all the cows were pregnant and of a similar age and stage of lactation. And then I put them into a test arena, one group a day, and the test arena was a laneway of 962 meters in length, which was between a loafing area down the bottom here, where they had a bit of mowed grass that they could lay on. They had a water trough, and I gave them an allocation of feed. And then 962 meters away, up the laneway, was the automatic milking system where they could go to be milked. So this was my first treatment. So I would take the cows down to this loafing area, give them a feed allocation, and then leave them be to do what they wanted. They could stay down there all day if they wanted to, or they could voluntarily walk back to the dairy. And I gave them 2 different treatments to try. So this was in laneway. And in the second treatment, I provided the cows with 5 small shade sources along the laneway, which I was predicting would encourage the cows to move. So not all of the cows could stand under one shade at the same time. So my thought here was that the cows would move to the first shade when it was hot, realize they couldn't all fit, so some of the cows would then move on to the next shade to be more comfortable. And then this would kind of have a leapfrog effect, and the cows would eventually traffic to the dairy, following each other as they went. So this is a series of photos to sort of show that behaviour that I was hoping to see from the cows. So this cow at the front couldn't fit in the shade with all the other cows, and you can even see some of the cows there weren't even fully in the shade. So she wandered off towards the next shade source, and as she did that, the remaining cows stood in the next shade, in that shade, watching her until they eventually decided they would follow her and see what was going on. And then they just kept moving further along the laneway until towards the next shade, until they eventually reached the milking facility. So the next shade was just to the left of this photo, just out of sight. And so this photo here in the background also shows, similarly shows this behaviour. So you can see the cow. There's one cow here under this shade. You can sort of make out just further down the laneway, there's another cow standing under the next shade there by herself. So that was the behaviour that I was looking for, that the cows would slowly move along the laneway, and as cows like to see what others are doing, they tend to follow the cows in front of them, knowing that there's shade further ahead to encourage them along. So the overall findings from that study was that when cows had access to shade along the laneway, they had a lower respiration rate and a lower body temperature. And they're also found to spend more time ruminating, grazing, and walking, which may indicate that their appetites may not have been as depleted as the cows that didn't have shade and didn't have that cooling relief. And then in a herd situation, that may indicate that when cows have shade on the laneway, their overall daily intake could potentially be improved, which may also help improve milk yield and cow performance and health. And from having the shade, the cows travelled further along the laneway than when the shade wasn't there, showing that the shade may have been encouraging the cows to walk further than they would normally should the shade not be there. And even though they did walk further, they weren't any more heat stressed than the other cows, which was also a really good finding from that study. So of the 16 total test runs that I had of the cows on these laneway, only 4 of them did result to the dairy, 2 of which were from a shade and 2 from a non-shaded treatment. But overall, from all the other test days, the cows with the shade did walk significantly further towards the dairy. And overall, these results seem fairly promising to be tested at the herd level. And from what I saw, I think it could work quite well in encouraging cows to move, as well as reducing their heat stress and not increasing it from that extra movement. So after looking at ways to improve cow traffic, both at night and during the day, I also wanted to look into ways of improving cow comfort. In the first study that I did, we found that milk yield and milking frequency were reduced. So I also wanted to look at how to improve milk yield. So on conventional dairy farms, it's quite common for farmers to provide cows with shade or sprinklers while they're in the pre-milking holding area. And from previous research that has been done, we've seen that that's quite an effective way of cooling the cows and improving their milk yield. So I wanted to look at this and to see how it would work on an automatic milking system, particularly as we still need the cows to voluntarily move through the pre-milking area onto the robots without having to use extra labour to push cows up all day. So I looked at this on our research farm at Camden that was milking approximately 300 cows at the time. And I randomly divided those cows into 2 groups. They were all managed together as one herd, except for when they came up to the milking facility. So when they arrived, they would come into an automatic drafting gate, and the cows that were in the no shade treatment would go left into a non-shaded pre-milking area, and the cows with shade access would then move to shaded yard, both yards of which would funnel into a communal area with one-way gates. And this small communal area could only hold a couple of cows at a time, and that then funneled the cows into the automatic milking brochure. And then after the cows are finished milking on the roastery, they came out into a post-milking area which has some undercover automatic concentrate feeders where the cows would receive a concentrate feed allocation and then they would move out after that to the paddocks. For 2 weeks, After 2 weeks, I then switched the cows in their treatments. So the cows from the non-shaded side would then go to the shaded side. They had a week to acclimatise to the new yard, and then I recorded the cows for another 2 weeks. So when the cows had access to shade at the dairy, similar to how they responded when they had shade on the laneway, they had lower respiration rates and body temperatures. And I also found that they had a higher milk yield and a higher concentrate consumption. So being that this study was only over a relatively short time, to already see improvements in milk yield and concentrate consumption, I believe was really promising. And should they have access to shade all summer, I think it could make a significant difference to overall production. So in 1999, an Australian study was released that showed that dairy cows that had no access to cooling, so shade or sprinklers, for every 100 cows, they would lose about $12,000 in income, so lost income each year. So that study was in 1999. I feel that now that value would be even higher. So that just puts extra emphasis on how important it is to provide cooling to cows, because it is quite a significant loss in income. The cows with shade access, they did spend more time in the treatment area, but with the potential improvements to production, as well as the competition that was there from the cows on the no shade side to push into the dairy, I don't think that would be a big problem, as without cows that were so desperate to get into the robot where the shade was, I don't think that if all the cows were shaded, I think that they would continue to move into the robots. So the extra time spent in the treatment area is not really a big concern for me. It was also seen that those cows that had shade in the pre-milking area did actually spend less time in that post-milking feeding area, which was also shaded. So it seems that those cows had received sufficient cooling from their pre-milking time and their milking time, that they didn't have to spend extra time in that post-milking area, unlike the cows that didn't have shade, that would spend more time waiting around in that feeding area. And so overall, from that study, I don't think I could recommend enough to pasture-based automatic milk farmers to use shade in their pre-milking area, because the benefits to the cows just seemed very strong, with very little, I think, downsides. So overall, the main findings from my PhD, this was just a quick grab at it without putting in too much detail. So the main findings that I had was that a higher temperature humidity index from up to 3 days previous was associated with a reduced milk yield and a reduced milking frequency for pasture-based automatic milking systems. Fetching cows at night, I found helped to improve the milking interval of cows, and also helped with training the first lactation cows on that farm. And to further improve voluntary cow traffic, using shade along the laneway appeared to as well as encourage them to walk further towards the milking facility, and shows a lot of promise for further studies to be done on this. And lastly, from the final study, where I looked at using shade at the milking facility, it appeared to reduce the heat load on the cows and improve cow performance, and I think is a very valuable thing for pasture-based farmers to use. And every pasture-based farm I've been to, I've highly recommended that they have shade in that area. So that's mostly it. If you had any questions for me, I'd be more than happy to answer them. If not now, to Nico later on and sort it out that way.
Thank you very much, Ash, for your presentation. Really very, very good. It's good, like I've known you for a couple of years, it's good to see how you've been able to pull all that hard work together. And it seems kind of that it was all a smooth ride, seeing everything being pulled together at this stage as you've done now. So congratulations on that hard work. And I think it really shows that it is a lot of work that you've done, that it was with farmers and on real farms, and is kind of putting that great science into practice. And I don't know if everybody noticed, but under each presentation you had that it had been submitted to a journal or accepted for publications. So I'm sure those things will become available. But I think it's a great piece of work. But there is a couple of questions that came through. One is, what feedback have you received from farmers from your research? Like when you share these results with farmers, what feedback do they think? Are they hesitating of putting shade, yes or no?
Every farmer that I've spoken to about heat stress on their farms, every one of them I've recommended to have a shaded pre-milking area, and I haven't received any negative feedback from that. That I've worked with in northern New South Wales, they have put during the installation they put in shade sails over their pre-milking area, and for them they said it was one of the best things that they've done, because heat is quite a problem up there, and they found that it was really beneficial for their cows. So I can't see many farmers wanting to refuse to have shade for their cows in that area.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, because we tend to think, or the perception is, that if we make cows too comfortable in the yard, they won't either walk into the robots or walk out. But we see that it provides enough comfort for them to be there, but they still move through the robots and get milked and eat the concentrate and all that. So I think that's a very good, valid point.
Yep.
The second
and
question
because
was,
the shade.
Yep, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say, and because the shade makes the cows more comfortable, it also helps return their appetite. And because there's no feed in that area, they have to progress through the dairy for more feed. That does help move them on without spending too much time. That's why I think a lot of farms don't have shade in the post-milking area, because I think then it might become more of a problem for cows spending a lot of time hanging around. So from that study of shade at the dairy, when cows had no shade pre-milking, they spent a lot of time pre-shade.
Excellent. The other question that came through is, do you suspect that having AMS avoids the incidence of heat stress, given that you don't have large herds or groups of cows together at any one point in time?
That's a good question. It's hard to say if cows in a AMS are any more or less heat stressed than cows in a conventional system. Yes, in an AMS, we're not forcing the cows, so we're not fetching them for milking twice a day, where afternoon milkings can quite often happen when it is quite hot, unless farmers adjust their milking times. So there is aren't being required to walk during the heat of the day unless they want to. But as for cows in an AMS being any more or less heat stressed. That'll be a good point for someone to research in the future. I know an indoor study was done comparing cows milked voluntarily versus cows batch milked in summer. And the cows that were milked automatically, their performance dropped a lot more than the cows that were being batch milked because those cows weren't volunteering for milking. But that was more of a performance effect. Don't actually know how it affects them from heat stress.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Then there was a question, what was the size of the shades in the laneway? How many cows could fit in there? And could this shade actually be trees?
Yes, well, there's been a lot of research done with using shade, and a lot of research has been done on comparing cows' preference for different shades, so be that trees or a tin shed or something like that. And cows are quite happy to use trees. I think anything blocking out 50% or more of UV rays for cows is preferred. Anything less than that, cows would rather, cows will have a much stronger preference for something that blocks out more sun. So trees with a fairly dense canopy, I guess, would work quite well for cows. And the shade structures, all 6 cows could cram in there, but probably 2 or 3 of the cows would at least be half in the sun. And that was designed on purpose so that it would encourage the cows to walk onto the next shade. So comfortably it would stand 3 cows. Uncomfortably it could stand all 6 of them, but not completely shaded.
Excellent, great response. The last question that came through at this stage is, great presentation. Have you considered breed differences as you seem to be showing pictures of Holstein cows?
I didn't look specifically at breeds because the research farm that I was using only has Friesians. These are a bit more resilient with hot weather. We would guess that they would perform differently. I know there's 2 robotic farms fairly close to each other in Victoria, one of which has Jersey cows and one of which has Friesian cows. And the farmer with the Jersey cows showed me this photo once of his Jersey cows in the background all spread out in the paddock grazing, and the Friesian cows from the other farm all gathered up either around the water trough or under the shade. So that's a pretty good indication, if any, that there is likely to be a breed difference.
Excellent, Ash. So I think there's no more questions that came through at this stage. So once again, I do want to thank you for your time and your willingness to share your research and your finding with us. I think it's provided a great insight of what's happening and the research that you've been doing in the last year. So thank you for that. For those of you that do receive the newsletter, this is not the first time that I do harass or bother Ash to provide some of her great insight of her research. In the newsletter that came out in February last year, that issue 6, that is available on the website, there was a section of Ask the Expert of the impact of climate and Ash's research. So that information is there, and you can access it on our website to see more information there. There's also a link in that article to the farm that Ash mentions on the North Coast that has robots on how they manage heat. And there's also a link to a video of a farmer in Northern Victoria that designed a portable shed that he could move around the paddocks to provide incentive to his cows, and the impact that had to his cow traffic and the management of the farm. So if you want to access it, please have a look at our website, and all the information is there. So sorry, and I also wanted to put out the Dairy Australia has a Cool Cows website with a lot of information on heat stress and how to manage it, quantify it, and work to mitigate it. There's nothing specific of AMS, but why not start incorporating some of these findings into that tool? So as with all our webinars, this webinar has been recorded and will become available on the New South Wales DPI Dairy website. And if you have any suggestion or webinar or topic that you would like us to cover, please feel free to tweet me an email. We also have a New South Wales DPI Dairy Facebook page, which is followed by around 950 people from all around the world, and a newsletter that is sent out regularly 3 times a year to almost 450 subscribers. So feel free to join and follow these initiatives and stay updated with all the work that we do in the areas of precision dairy farming. So for more information, I encourage you all to visit the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries website, where you will be able to access tools and resources about the dairy industry. There is a specific section on there of precision dairy farming, which includes a lot of information, not only on robotic milking, but also on a lot of other precision dairy farming tools. So once again, thank you very much for joining today and hope to see you next time.